Some say that history repeats itself, that we fall into a routine and keep going through the motions. Oftentimes, it isn't as effective the second time through. This is the most fitting description I can give to Season 8 plus 9. It takes a lot of cues from Season 7's playbook, but the result isn't exactly the same. Is it just an inferior repeat of Season 7, or does it do something to stand out? Is this where things really start to fall apart? Is the show getting too complacent and coasting on whatever momentum it has left? Let's take a look. I can say, if anything, it certainly loves its lobsters. By the way, it's hard to believe we're really at this point. At the time I made this, some of these episodes aren't even a year old. Okay, first things first, I know what you're all probably wondering. Why are we covering 2 seasons instead of just 1? That's because it's supposed to be 1 season with one unified identity. Season 9 is just the back half of the 8th production season. And in turn, the so-called seasons 10 and 11 are just both halves of the 9th production season. Kinda reminds me of Sonic 3 and Knuckles in a funny way. The split was a cause for concern when it was first revealed, not at all helped by the time it took for the show to announce its 8th season renewal. But the reasons for this may actually be related to streaming. A given season will not be available to stream, in this case on Paramount Plus, until its final episode has been aired, so superficially splitting up the seasons speeds up this process considerably. And The Loud House isn't the only one. Both SpongeBob and Rock Paper Scissors have been hit with this as well, so it seems to be a universal approach that Paramount is taking for their cartoons. That's not the only thing weird about this season. Ever notice that the font on some of the title cards is just different now? Yeah, apparently the people who own the show's iconic Skater Dudes font discovered that Nick did not have the proper license to use it for the show. So, for legal reasons, they had to abandon it and create their own exclusive title font, which was first used for A Night to Remember. Chalk it up to another bad life decision. And speaking of bad life decisions, this season retains one of its predecessor's major flaws. That's right, nostalgia bait throwback is back! Thankfully, it's just 2 episodes this time, but they couldn't be more opposite in terms of writing. The Walking Bed was an alright outing. Lincoln needs a new mattress, and Lori's old mattress is up for grabs, so Lincoln uses all sorts of loopholes to send it down the line of succession so it gets in his hands, with plenty of classic Loud House chaos thrown in as things escalate. There are only a few notable flaws with the episode. The Loud rulebook made it feel awkwardly primitive given its place in the series, Chandler's back for gags, which of course pleases no one, and Lynn, of course, gets violent. Now, before you guys bring the pitchforks out and accuse me of being a Saint Lincoln, Lynn had every right to be angry with him. I just really hate seeing siblings beat each other up, especially when it's a fitness demigod wailing on someone who cannot fight back. Still, despite these faults, it had a good lesson attached, and a very sweet ending to go along with it. Meanwhile, the other episode, that would be the infamous Hologram Jam, easily the most hated episode of the season. Lincoln plans to hang out with Clyde and Liam, but his room, for whatever reason, is a literal landfill that even Season 1 Lincoln would be ashamed of. They got out of cleaning his room first, along with Luann's god-awful roast. He takes a shortcut and uses Lisa's hologram projector to make it look like he's doing the chores first. And move over, jerk-ass Homer, because Brainrot Lincoln is here. He arrogantly gets his phone wet, and the holograms multiply, causing all sorts of chaos and pissing the family off. And it is Lincoln's character regression at its worst. Arrogance, stupidity, sheepish, and pathetic. And much lazier than even his Season 1 self. And everyone seems to be sick of him and his moronic antics. While people overreacted a bit, he did actually get off pretty easy for this whole ordeal. The hate that this episode gets is absolutely still warranted. Lincoln has long since grown out of most of these bad habits, and unlike Fluffed and Foiled last season, he didn't have a compelling reason to be taking shortcuts. Seriously, who is this written for? Lincoln was made even worse in this season oneself just to force the scenario to work, and it exemplifies everything wrong with modern Loud House throwback. One bad episode about holographic doubles is more than enough. We did not need more. But of course, this isn't the only way it parallels Season 7. Following the success of the road trip arc, they decided to make another, albeit with just 5 episodes instead of 7. And this time, the Louds are going overseas. The arc opener gets right into the action. Luna and the rest of the Louds have been invited to London to attend Mick Swagger's knighting ceremony. The family arrives at the royal castle and start to explore, and Lincoln runs into an agent disguised as an armored knight. Turns out this is actually X, Myrtle's boss from No Time to Spy, who's received a tip that a robbery is going to occur during the ceremony. And to nobody's surprise, Lincoln wants to get involved. I really do not get why they're having him relearn a lesson from No Time to Spy. That movie already had enough characterization issues as it is. But looking back on the whole scenario, he actually handles it a lot better. Gone is the obsessive streak that he had in that movie's first act. He doesn't go looking for suspicious activity until he runs into X. And he even gets to prove his deduction skills by exposing the incompetence of her quote-unquote professional agents. You know, in hindsight, maybe it was for the better that Lincoln took the Dufu mission. And because of this, she even gives him permission to assist with the investigation on this lower stakes mission. He also calls in his family to help, doesn't act behind anyone's backs, reports to the professionals instead of trying to act on his own, and even gathers critical information, especially when Lori deduces that the keyword tips of Shredder and Jam likely correlate to 2 expensive treasures within the castle. But then, the lights cut, and it turns out the thief's target was Mick Swagger himself, the keyword tips apparently being their rock and roll terminology instead. X puts the blame on Lincoln for quote-unquote blundering the mission, and he feels immense guilt for Mick's kidnapping, despite this being a misunderstanding that anyone could have easily made, which only makes it all the more sour. The mistakes and accountability felt forced when he actually did things the right way this time around. It also kinda sucks that Luna's moment of reassurance here wasn't totally genuine. This could have been a real meaningful moment of bonding between the two, made all the more meaningful coming from a Mick Swagger superfan like herself. They really did not need to throw in a self-deprecating joke. But it was fun to see them come to a genuine realization together, and how the family as a whole is very supportive and helpful during the whole ordeal. And it's this moment that reveals that Mick is leaving clues to his kidnapper's whereabouts, which leads to a high-speed chase all across London, and eventual arrival at the culprit's castle, the gator-obsessed Earl of Nottingham. When they try and sneak into the castle, he traps them in a cage, and reveals that he too is a Mick Swagger superfan, forcing him to perform a personal, never-ending concert as vengeance for passing up his birthday invite. Thankfully, with some ingenuity and trickery, the Louds manage to save their favorite musician, who rewards them with a trip around Europe for their heroic act. Lincoln gets his flowers from X and her agents, while Luna gets to perform with Mick at the knighting ceremony. All in all, a solid opener, though I will say the framing device definitely isn't as coherent as the previous trip. Something about this feels like it was meant to be a standalone spy special during this season's production, but then the staff noticed how well received the previous road trip was and tacked a new one onto this. Especially since the last one had an actual goal and wind down, while this one just kinda ends. But that's just speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. Still, there's definitely some missed potential. Lynn Sr. used to be obsessed with British culture, and didn't get the chance to show his family his old stomping grounds like he wanted to, so it would have been fun to revisit this old concept with a proper B-plot. There's also the fact that this episode's previews kinda hyped up that a quote-unquote old friend would be returning, which we now know turned out to be X. It falls kinda flat because when this episode first aired, No Time to Spy was only about 4 months old, and Lincoln never really interacted with her much anyway. If it weren't for the Netflix contract, it would have been the perfect time to see Angus again, and revisit Loch Loud. Speaking of which, in said movie, we see the path the Louds took through Europe to eventually get to Scotland, and if you compare the places they visited to those they went to during this road trip, they didn't double dip at all, which is good attention to detail, intentional or not. So the Louds hop on their double-decker bus and hit the road. Their first proper stop is in Naples, Italy, in order to try the world's best pizza thanks to an invite from Gus. My friend Icy Seabass talked about just how naturally this episode fits the family, something even I didn't pick up on the first time. Alongside Lincoln's connections to Gus, if it's one thing that the family is known for, it's their love of pizza, so it makes sense that they'd go all out of their way to try a legendary pie from the master. And when they're attacked with meatballs, who better to deal with them than the sibling that loves meatball subs? The episode is loaded up on fun set pieces too, and even has a couple of fun background cameos of previous visitors. Alongside Mick Swagger, we get a picture of Keith the Snake, who appeared in Screen Queen from the previous road trip. A sweet little callback. Switzerland marks our next destination, where Lynn plans to compete in the Snow Fury Games. She was picked as the thumbnail character for reasons we'll discuss later, but it's here where Lynn falls in love with one of the local boys, an upbeat young man named Henrik. That's right, she finally gets a love interest. Lori and Lenny coach her on how to approach him properly, and the two really connect, forming a strong bond despite Lynn's worries about the two being competitors in the games. And it's not only that, this episode would even get a follow-up in the form of Merry Dismiss, where Henrik visits Royal Woods during a holiday vacation. And the two realize that despite their feelings, they don't want to rush into a proper relationship so soon. Which is both a good message and a very real situation some viewers may find themselves in someday. Though these are his only appearances thus far, he's a very welcome addition, being someone that can match Lynn's tenacity while simultaneously bringing out her sweeter side. And this is exactly the kind of thing that Lynn needed. It shows that she does have a capacity for romance, despite what we saw in Singled Out. Next up, on a trip through Transylvania, the bus breaks down, and the family is invited to stay with an older couple who happen to heavily resemble vampires. And everyone is freaking out about this, convinced that they're the real deal. Except, oddly enough, Lucy. She actually plays the voice of reason here, and tells the family that vampires haven't existed there for hundreds of years. And it's true, the Ratus really are just normal human beings. And I'll give the writers props for the restraint, considering the era of Loud House we're in. Most other shows would have gone with the twist ending of them being real after all, despite the logical explanations. Even one of the network's sacred cows is very well known to do this. Sadly, the fans put this in a real damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If you do, it's all, oh, it's just modern Loud House indulging in fantasy elements again. And if they don't, they're like, oh, it's such a cliche ending. Loud House is running on fumes. Which is a shame, because this episode knew what it wanted to do and did it well. And we still got the whole ambiguity thing with the hairy mechanic at the end, so it is what it is. Athens marks the final stop on the road trip, and I definitely have some things I want to say about this one. So the family is taking a guided tour at the Parthenon, and Lincoln puts on a Spartan helmet, sending him back in time to 450 BC. He meets a young pottery painter who apparently had a premonition of a time-traveling kid. His name? Clydius McBridius. Yeah, this kid is a Clyde clone, complete with the same name and design, along with having two dads and a Nana Gale in 450 BC. And he's not the only one. We get a Spartan clone of Rusty named Rustus the Great, with no differences from his counterpart either. This episode also confirms that apparently Greek mythology is canon in the Loud House universe. Oh boy. I do like the Greek Odyssey aspect, but the premise is too meaty and high stakes for an 11-minute time frame. The set pieces are rushed, and by the time we get to Athens, there's only a minute and a half left. Building on that, this episode is extremely historically inaccurate even for a cartoon. Clydius and Rustus use Roman-style names instead of Greek. Rustus should be in the Spartan Agoge instead of trying to impress the ladies in Athens. In fact, they were actually at war during this time. And despite the writers going whole hog on the mythology, the Parthenon is shown to be not a temple to Athena like it was in real life, but an open-air market? That's an outright critical research failure. In fact, when they got there, I was half expecting to see Philippius Philippinius scamming people at a market stall. Anyway, Lincoln makes it back to the present after returning the helmet, but this is a very odd note to end the whole arc on. Taking things in a different direction, this season is also home to the second ever 1-hour special, a Dog Squad Halloween adventure called Close Encounters of the Nerd Kind. Lincoln and his pals have recently become superfans of Planet Protection Patrol, some sort of Guardians of the Galaxy knockoff, and decide to go trick-or-treating as the characters, which involved Zack bringing legitimate alien fighting equipment his parents made to use as props. Chandler and Trent show up to spook them later on, and the former talks mockingly into an alien communicator. And what follows is a string of mysterious disappearances and power failures across town. The gang ends up cornering one of the aliens, leading into an all-out brawl on their spaceship to rescue their abducted friends, followed by a dangerous flight through an asteroid field and eventual amends with the aliens, when Lisa promises to provide an alternative fuel source to get home. A win for intergalactic diplomacy, as Stella would call it. In the end, it was a solid special, and far surpasses both Schooled and Great Lakes Freakout in terms of being a 1 hour and Halloween special respectively. The Dog Squad was great, as always. Some of the jokes were on point. It was nice seeing Lisa get into the spirit of the holiday again, and we even get to see Liam make a direct callback to Cow Pie Kid. But it's unfortunately held back by a few major issues, which isn't surprising for this point in the series. To start it off, the world building wasn't really made to accommodate large-scale networks of intergalactic civilizations existing in the background. This kind of thing works for something magic-heavy like Fairly OddParents, or sci-fi heavy like Jimmy Neutron that establish it early on, but not this. Normally I'm willing to accept some fantasy elements, especially as a big fan of the movie, but this was way too much even for me. Then there's this subplot for Lucy and the other siblings trying to make a haunted house, and for whatever reason Lucy's completely lost her edge, and can't even scare Darcy. What happened to that epic corn maze? And to top it all off, she tried to give Lincoln a thankless role as a corpse in a bush, so I don't blame him for kind of blowing it off. And it's a shame because the two coordinated something truly amazing and tricked. And finally, there's the matter of Chandler. It's clear that there's no way to earn this kid's respect anymore, especially when Lincoln and Clyde were able to do so for much less in Jeers for Fears. I get that they want to leave the door open for him to be an antagonist in the future, but they missed a good opportunity to give some depth to an otherwise insufferable character. So how have these characters fared after all that went on? Lincoln's had a very up and down season, and history is certainly repeating for him. They made his fourth wall segment a recurring thing again, but in turn, the regression continues. The writers are trying to bring back the loser element, being voted most likely to trip over air, and the go-to slapstick target if he's in a group episode. Not to the extent we saw in Season 3, but absolutely noticeable. We already saw how much the writers are willing to drag his character backwards. It's only fitting that alongside that regression, his interests would regress as well. While his deductive reasoning remains on point, his movie-making and magical skills are now far from it. Went from cool and stylish and something he could build towards to a constant inconvenience to everyone and a source of continuous screw-ups, which in Zach's case got the nurse involved. Ballhoffner even comments that this is a recurring issue. Cuff Break is definitely a low point for his magical skills. Now he's dropping his magician's equipment in the shitter bowl out of total incompetence. It's getting to such a dire state that artists just give the whole magic thing to someone else instead. And then there's the David Steele movies. How do you go from super high-tech professional production to crappy cardboard cutouts in the backyard? Scene Stealer was another low point, where the boys are desperate for approval from some shit reviewer, and they bring in Luann to play the villain in their next movie, only to have her go completely psycho on both of them off camera because it's required for her quote-unquote method acting. Luann was way too malicious, and the boys were outright pathetic, being framed as the guilty party. And it was a writing disservice to all three of them. And this kind of toxic method acting actually happens in real life. Holes was a particularly infamous example, where set conditions were notoriously hellish as it is. One of the movie's antagonists was Mr. Sir, an abrasive man who would carry out the warden's orders and take his frustrations out on the campers. But his actor, Jon Voight, known for his hardcore dedication to acting, would stay in character even when the cameras were off, and his deliberately rude and uncomfortable behavior made the already tense atmosphere that much worse. So I don't get why people try and defend this episode, I just don't. But that isn't to say that Lincoln didn't have his fair share of ups. He still gets plenty of moments to show off his intelligence. Loads of stories depict him as a family leader, as per usual, helping others in various situations, and outside of that one moment in Cuff Break, his Dog Squad adventures are still on point. Not even close to the scheming weasel that some of his critics try to present him as. And he still gets plenty of chances to be the cool one. Stealing Thunder has him winning the film festival pretty handily, and in a twist of the formula, he takes the plane stunt that he faked and actually pulls it off for real, if clumsily. His ancient Greek odyssey lands him front and center on a pristine artifact visited by thousands of tourists each week. He takes an alien spaceship he's never flown before and successfully navigates an asteroid field, and even sets a successful and highly effective trap for the snack thief in Homeward Bound. He even gets his own performance of David Steele on ice, and teleporting Lola's homework out of her backpack was pretty damn cool. So it's clear that the regression is becoming a problem, but it hasn't consumed the character yet. Not quite sure what to say about his best friend, though. Clyde just kept doing what he's been doing, and there's nothing wrong with that. He does get an episode about him and Nana Gale running a dessert truck and butting heads over how complex their baked goods should be. Conflict between loved ones in the workplace seems to be an oddly common trend this season. It wasn't a particular standout, but it was nice to see the Louds come together to help Clyde renovate the would-be food truck. And after their hijinks, the two leads end up on a cruise ship bound for Ireland. Good job, Clyde! You got to go to Europe, too! Lori actually received a major status quo change this time around. She's decided to take a gap year, one that would end up being permanent. Thus, readjusting to life back in Royal Woods would be the central focus of her episodes this season. The progression of the whole ordeal was surprisingly natural. Homeward Bound sends her apartment hunting, unable to readjust back to life in a crowded home, which leads her to renting out Mr. Grouse's garage. In turn, this results in her siblings trying to take advantage of that private space and apartment complex, and their antics bring the matter of money into the situation. Utilities are expensive after all, and Lori needs a way to pay the rent Grouse charges. Thus, she ends up working as a barista at the Burnt Bean, and butts heads with Luann in response to her poor managerial skills. Lori herself, meanwhile, was proven to be a great manager. Why didn't she just go back to working at Lynn's table instead? They even messed up Carol and Roger's designs, which upset a lot of fans when this episode first aired. Oh, and she and Bobby raised a kitten for a few weeks, which spent some time living in the garage, so it sorta connects. So with all that said, you have to wonder why the writers decided to bring Lori home. As we've seen these past couple of seasons, her location is flexible and not a major issue for writing scenarios. There was little to no foreshadowing for this whole ordeal. Lori never expressed any discontentment about the direction of her life, so why abandon it? The most probable explanation is that the college stories just weren't resonating with the target audience, and the mix of having to keep it PG for the censors while sticking to a strictly golf theme made it difficult to create interesting and funny scenarios. Congratulations, Lenny! You got to be the victim of someone's poorly disguised fetish! Disregarding that whole sordid affair, Lenny spent this season playing the supporting or co-starring role in a lot of stories, including 2 of Lynn's Focus episodes. Which isn't shocking, Lenny is a clear writer's favorite. So remember back in Season 5 when she mentioned being part of the dance committee? Now she's running the operation for the senior prom, bringing her managerial skills into a new setting. It's a good depiction of the pressure that comes from high expectations and the desire to leave a lasting legacy. A lot of the mishaps that occurred really weren't her fault, but she ultimately learns that it's not the flashy theatrics and fancy food, but actually the friendship and the camaraderie with your classmates that will create those lasting memories. If her brother's big issue is character regression, then Luna's has to be total stagnation. Yeah, despite the near-constant fan hype she gets just for existing, she is not in a good spot right now, at least from a writing perspective. The writers went whole hog on her development in Season 3, and it's clear that they haven't known what to do with her since Season 6. The Mooncoats keep hitting what are supposedly these major milestones, but none of these actually stick. None of them further the growth or development of the band, and are quickly forgotten by the next episode. Not being helped is the near-complete lack of development for any of Luna's bandmates. Yes, this includes Sam, so the band's unity is difficult to get invested in. Chunk is being turned into more and more of a joke, making him completely ineffective as a mentor. We do need a roadie for tonight's gig. Chunk got his hand stuck in the pickle jar again! And is that him living in his beat-up van? You know, the thing that sparked Luna's entire internal conflict in Roadie to Nowhere, and that he assured her wasn't the case? And then there's her Focus episode, The Weakest Ink, which exemplified all of these problems, with a generic lie revealed plot as the cherry on top. Thankfully, her co-starring roles with their siblings were much more organic and interesting scenarios, but if images like this are being made, there is definitely something wrong. One of those better scenarios put her at odds with Luann when they decided to enter the same talent competition, with $5,000 on the line. And Luann had quite the busy season. We get another look at her cooking skills, and she adds the role of a barista to her growing carousel of jobs, which would make it twice this season where she gets into an extended conflict with another sibling. And while Only Time Will Tell was a fun little experiment, giving us a script where the lead is silent for most of the episode, it's actually Gags to Riches that's the big standout. She decides to prank Mr. Grouse with a fake lottery ticket, and it starts out like these kind of plots usually do, with him going on a shopping spree and maxing out all of his credit cards. But things escalate in the funniest way, where he suddenly goes into hyperdebt and becomes a wanted criminal on the run, and Luann gets forcibly roped in as his accomplice. Then you've got people like Mr. Ballhofter trying to hunt him down and collect the bounty, and then police helicopters corner him in the woods. So you're probably thinking, how the hell do they manage to get out of this? After all, they're not going to write off two of the show's important cast members, right? Well, in here comes the big twist. This whole thing was a prank. One that most of the cast spent months planning to the last detail, and it was definitely cathartic to see Luann get a taste of her own medicine. And it's probably just a coincidence, but in Bulking and Sulking, Lincoln asks Mr. Grouse, "What can I get for you? Steak? Chicken? The winning lottery numbers?" Very, very suspicious. So, you all knew this one was coming. Lynn had a monster of a season, snagging an unprecedented 6 focus episodes. Even previous headliners like Lori in Season 4 only got 4. Felt like practically every other episode was about her in the back half, and it's not to mention a boatload of fun appearances and supporting roles where she gets something notable to do. She is like all over this thing. And it seems like the writers were trying to address her biggest criticism this time around. Her aggression is drastically dialed back, and outside of this one moment in the gloat, she does little to no gross out. In fact, a running theme for her this season was how her character flaws negatively impacted herself. Her superstition and crystal ballin' that makes her paranoid about how every little thing will affect her future, her abrasive attitude and alpining away that makes it hard for her to approach others, and her competitiveness in the gloat that shows how her confidence can be easily damaged if challenged, and how it negatively impacts her relationship with her cousin. Soul Searching further illustrated that said confidence is not ironclad, while telling an otherwise fun story about trying to get an in-demand item. That episode also gave us a direct flashback to On Thin Ice, which is a rarity for the show and a welcome bit of continuity. Overall, she was written well this season. My only real criticism is how god-awful her future design is in Crystal Ballin'. I hate how the go-to method of designing a toned woman these days is to stick her head on All Might's body. But to be fair, the family as a whole looks terrible too, so she isn't the only one. Her strength is also becoming very exaggerated. She went from a girl that loves sports to some kind of fitness demigod that can lift cars and houses. With that aside, I'm not the biggest Lynn fan, but I'm very proud of her performance. She has more than earned that thumbnail. The writers just can't decide what they want Lucy to be. Her magic continues to get more annoyingly extreme, and it's absurd how easy it is to access reality-bending magic with no repercussions. Now your kid can pick up a literal window into the future for a cost of a week's allowance. Now your kid can get transmogrification magic as a birthday present that can potentially have lasting effects. Same kit comes with literal anti-aging magic. Why isn't every senior in Royal Woods using this, let alone the world? Or how about a new spell book made of real dragon leather? How does Lucy even feel about this, given she has a close relationship with an actual dragon? Even the Casa Grandes gets in on this, where a second-rate birthday party magician can leave you with permanent disability if she fucks up a trick. But the big issue that really plagues Lucy this season is the inconsistent depiction of her character. One episode she's a morbid and emotionally fucked up goth stereotype who will never show emotion ever, something that started becoming a problem in earlier episodes, while others depict her as a nuanced and empathetic character both in her interests and emotions, who can act as the voice of reason a la seasons 3 or 4, and in some she flips between the two. She even implies that joy is a foreign concept to her, and a nice episode like Writer's Retreat is plagued with the former. when it's, otherwise, a calm story about Rita giving her daughter advice when she hits writer's block due to the pressure of writing a story for the Gazette. Lucy really needs a psychologist. They've run this joke into the ground and escalated it way too much. It just isn't funny anymore. Lana had her usual grab bag of interests, getting 2 solid focus episodes. One focuses on her inability to leave her pets behind after she wins a 2-day vacation with Lola and Rita, and the mayhem that ensued at this pet-unfriendly mountain resort. While she was never this overbearingly hands-on with them in the past, it was nice to see her learn that others can be trusted to take care of them, and she even gets to use her mechanical skills to fix the big attraction and make amends with the staff. Meanwhile, the other focuses on her friendship with Dink the Garbage Man, and her attempts to save Dink's job when Mayor Davis brings in a high-tech garbage truck. Ultimately, Dink gets to stick around when the townsfolk come to vouch for him and the extra acts of kindness he provides, though I think they could have had their cake and eaten it too, combining the human element of Dink with the efficiency of the RR7 to make the ultimate trash-collecting team. Nonetheless, it was a good outing for Lana that highlighted an intergenerational friendship. And it had some solid jokes mixed in as well. Lola decided to mirror her twin and snag 2 focus episodes of her own. Rough Patch brings back the twins' Girl Scouts element, something we haven't seen in a long time, and for a senior bonding initiative, it pairs Lola up with Bernie, one of the more underexplored members of the Sunset Canyon residency. And of course, Lola finds him boring and ends up taking shortcuts. The last couple of minutes were very sweet and showed how self-aware Bernie is, but overall it's kinda bogged down by being yet another formulaic episode about Lola learning to be genuine. Wild Goss Chase is where she really shines, however. Thanks to her gossiping skills, Lola's recruited to the school newspaper to write drama columns by a girl named Jamie, who mentioned is actually the niece of Rita's boss at the Gazette. She ends up exposing all sorts of embarrassing secrets about the people around school, and having an extremely negative impact on the subjects of her articles, even if Mrs. Johnson kinda deserves some comeuppance for taking her prank too far. And of course, she learns her lesson when stuck in an embarrassing situation herself, and makes things right by publishing her embarrassing story and then quitting the newspaper. It was nice to see some familiar faces again, like Melly and the elementary school staff, even if just for a moment, since they've been painfully neglected for a long time. Though I really don't think they needed to do a self-deprecation ending. We already saw more than enough of this with Lincoln in Season 1, and that's something best left in the past. They did some interesting ideas with Lisa this season. Her character remains consistent, but her focus episodes went with some fresh concepts. Salesforce has her raise money for her science club by selling scented candles. Come to think of it, money's been a recurring theme this season, hasn't it? Anyway, she literally rewires her brain to make herself a better saleswoman, which ends up enhancing her charisma at the cost of utterly consuming her consciousness. And she literally has to fight with her split personality in the episode's climax. This whole ordeal felt like a Jimmy Neutron episode, and I mean that in a good way. And then there's In Todd Nito, where Darcy invites Lisa to her birthday party, but it's scheduled on the same day as a scientific presentation Lisa wants to attend. Lisa sends a disguised Todd to the party, and despite all the mishaps, nobody can tell the difference. We then get a classic case of Lisa choosing her humanity over science, and it ends with the two making birthday memories. And as much as I complained about what happened in Close Encounters, it's nice that the writers are starting to use Darcy again. She brings a certain energy to Lisa's episodes and acts as a morality pet of sorts like Todd does. It's very sweet that Lisa still cares about her. And as for Todd, enjoy those Pop-Tarts. You've earned them. Lily is still herself, there isn't much more to say. It wasn't a particularly Lily-heavy season. She does get a semi-focused episode in The Klingon Eye, where she's shown to go through different phases where she has different favorite siblings, but it's entirely told from Lana's perspective. She at least got a couple of fun moments with the dog squad. That's always a treat. It wasn't the biggest season for Lynn or Rita either, though I know that tends to be the case more often than not. Thank God for that road trip, helping keep their numbers up. Lynn definitely fared better given the focus on his side of the family, and he tended to play supporting roles in other characters' episodes. Some of his off-treatment from No Time to Spy did trickle into this season, and one of his main outings was about being childish and dramatic over a cold, but it wasn't the total emasculation that he got last time. And hey, he scored the Family Guy death pose, that's something. His other focused episode, Bulking and Sulking, showed that he can still be the mature and responsible one, being understandably upset when he gives Lance the chance to open up a gym on top of his restaurant and all of the trouble it accidentally causes. And the brothers handled this way better than their old feud, which is a plus. Rita was neglected, as she unfortunately tends to be. She gave Lucy the opportunity to write a short story for the Gazette and helps her get over her writer's block with some good advice in a lake retreat, but she otherwise gets no focused episode of her own. Nonetheless, it was an organic fit for both characters, and I'm surprised they didn't do this idea sooner. With a shorter travel arc and no movie standing in the way, some members of our supporting cast had a notable rebound, which means our John DiMaggio duo is back in full force. Flip can now add fantasy LARPing to his list of side hustles. And what's with this Flippy factory outlet? Wouldn't the Flippy HQ just be the food and fuel? Another hint at that huge Flippy operation from a few seasons ago. He and Nacho even get a spotlight episode in Whether or Not. Nacho's uncanny ability to predict the weather makes him increasingly famous, and Flip gets a lesson in friendship when he realizes he's neglecting his best friend in favor of the wealth he generates. And thus, he has to make amends before he heads off to Norway for good. And they absolutely nailed the tackiness of Jersey. The Newark airport isn't anywhere near this nice. The premise was a little unorthodox, but it was nice to see another side to Flip's character. Just goes to show you how beloved he is, at least by the writers. So the front half of Cuff Break was an absolute mess of a script, but the back half is where the episode really shines. It's here that we get a look into Mr. Grouse's past. He attended Royal Woods Middle School back when he was a kid, making him a fellow kangaroo just like the Dog Squad. And he was into that whole 50s to early 60s greaser culture, which really impresses them. He shows the group some of the school's old secrets, and we're even treated to a montage of his exploits around campus, all to the tune of classic doo-wop. Between this, Grease is the Word, and the 50s Diner and Rough Patch, it's clear that someone in the writer's room is a huge fan of the glory days. Anyway, Mr. Grouse is having such a good time that he actively blocks all of the Brailisters' attempts to contact Lincoln and uncuff the two, but is convinced to hustle when the magician reveals that he's about to spend a month in Tampa. We're also given a look into a young Grouse's social life. Of course, his friends just happen to resemble the Dog Squad, but unlike what we saw with Clydius and Rustus, they were given different names and design changes to make them a little more distinct. For whatever reason, they made one of them this bizarre Lincoln and Liam hybrid, but it was actually a pretty smart move, since having a past friendship with a Loud would recontextualize his entire relationship with his neighbors. Speaking of which, the whole friendship between Grouse and the Dog Squad was fun, and I hope they give it more development in the future. And the Dog Squad themselves had some notable developments. For the first time in several seasons, the squad gets a new member. Kara helps run her family's local comic shop, and the group stages an interview to gain access to a lost issue of David Steele residing in the back of the store. But they soon realize how cool she is as a person and befriend her for real. Tagging along on subsequent Dog Squad adventures, she'd play the role of a level-headed newcomer still getting used to the group dynamics. Technically, she made her debut in Beg, Borrow, and Steal, but this season is treated as her first time meeting Lincoln, and I have no complaints about that episode getting ignored. She even gets an episode with Lincoln and Clyde about joining their gaming squad, and learning to adjust to team dynamics after being a lone wolf for so long. Another episode that falls a bit flat due to Kara being a near unstoppable ace at everything, but the fun comes in the fact that it is absolutely peppered with video game references, from the Banjo Honey Bomb to the DK Bongos, and so much more. Hell, this even bleeds into the rest of the season. Overall, while I don't think Kara's addition was necessarily a benefit to the group and largely feels unnecessary, it'll be interesting to see how she factors into the group dynamics as time goes on. But that's not to say that the rest of the group didn't have their notable moments. Rusty absolutely killed it with the jokes, like the bird paint and the 12 Days of Rustmas, complete with its own parental advisory warning. No idea what's on that thing, but hey, it hit number 81 in Antarctica. Liam kept his streak of incidental use going. When a glowing ghost lady says get on the tractor, you get on the tractor. But one of their adventures this season, one that's actually quite underrated, and that Kara is absent from, oddly enough, would be kangaroos. Someone's been trashing school property, and Crikey the kangaroo has been framed for the act, so the dog squad must prove his innocence and catch the real culprit. They even do this whole parody of the Miami Vice and those sort of 80s cop shows, which was a unique surprise that felt surprisingly natural. We never really talked about Crikey before. He was introduced back in Season 6 as the middle school mascot, whose whole gimmick was just being a violent and feral asshole to everyone else. But it seems like the writers wanted to give him more prominence going forward, soft rebooting him into a lovable and more anthropomorphic mascot full of school spirit. Considering how close he is to Liam, maybe he did the same thing that Lana did to calm Stella's rabbits. Either way, they proved Crikey's innocence and learned that the music teacher, Mr. Button, framed him out of petty vengeance. He did not go to a prestigious musical school just to play backup pop songs for a kangaroo. He was an interesting choice for this episode, considering we haven't seen him since Season 5. In fact, between this, Chef Pat's involvement, the cherry ice cream, someone close to the dog squad being framed for vandalism, it has a lot of unintentional callbacks to that season. This is only made even more interesting by the fact that when I first saw this episode, I was literally working on the Season 5 retrospective. Good show, Dog Squad. Jolly good show. As has been a trend since the Age Up, Lynn's side of the family has continued to get extensive focus. Leonard continues his tenure as the main grandpa character. Pop-Up gets a single scene of pressure cooker and that's it. He brings both of his sons and grandsons on a fishing trip, which ends with the encounter and later reconciliation with an old nemesis from the deep. He then lends his boat to Lenny and Luna for their viewing party, and develops a taste for disco boots in the process. Alongside his dynamic with his younger brother, Lance got a plot with Shelby, fearing that their bond is fading. Even if it wasn't really built up to, we've basically spent no time with his family. So he gets wrapped up in the world of live-action roleplay and can't quite understand it, only putting him further at odds with his daughter. Though LARPing can look and feel both illogical and ridiculous for an outsider, so I honestly get how he's feeling. Speaking of the cousins, they've been steadily growing in prominence. Shiloh gets heavily involved in 2 separate episodes, and Shelby serves as co-star in the episode we just discussed. But I can't exactly say I'm sold on them. They largely feel like watered-down versions of main cast members who were added and heavily marketed to try to score some brownie points. Yes, I am saying that resident quirk chungus Shelby Loud is a blatant industry plant. Especially when they seem to be more well-received than most of the genuinely entertaining members of the supporting cast, including their own father, purely because they happen to be Louds. Speaking of which, the rest of the supporting cast bounced back to varying degrees. Unfortunately, this includes resident dirtbag Scoots, who's probably the worst she's ever been. In fact, it's her screw-up and lack of accountability that fucks up Leonard's boat. Not surprised that most were reluctant to save her when she was drowning, and she thanks Luna by running over her foot. Yeah, those repeated collisions she suffered in Rough Patch felt so cathartic. Oddly enough, her boyfriend Tyler, of all people, was surprisingly prominent. Like, it wasn't even his busiest season, but somehow it feels like he has more of a presence, netting plenty of small appearances, even some where Scoots was entirely absent. He even gets to kickstart the plot of Pressure Cooker by suggesting the food truck idea to the McBrides. And we can't forget his Daft Punk impression, that's important. Honestly, if it weren't for his weird relationship with Scoots, he'd be a great recurring character, just being this chill DJ guy who can turn any moment into a party. Let's go back to the question that started this whole video. What is this season's identity? How does it stack up compared to its predecessor? With a fresh perspective on the season, I think this is best answered with an analogy. The first few seasons were like the show in childhood, full of terrible bumps in the road, but overall fondly regarded and looked back on. 4 and 5 were the awkward teenage years, going through some big changes and just trying to figure things out, switching up approaches from chill and relax to full throttle trial by fire. Young adults naturally mellow out a bit as they enter college, reflected by seasons 6 and 7, finding their footing, a sense of direction, with some nostalgia thrown in. But they're also headstrong and adventurous, willing to explore new ideas with their newfound freedom. It's quite literally where we have a member of our main cast in college. So where does that leave seasons 8 and 9? They feel like life during your mid-20s and 30s, where the days just kind of blur together, falling into a sense of complacency and going through the motions. It hasn't forgotten how to have fun, but outside of a couple of instances, it's not trying to subvert your expectations. It just wants to do its job, bad decisions and all. And at this point, at least at the time of this video, the line between seasons starts to become more blurred. So what do you think of Season 8 plus 9 and the general flavor of it all? What were your favorite moments from this less talked about season? Let me know in the comments. Now, do you love Christmas gone horribly wrong? Then grab your snow boots, cause we're going to the North Pole.